there, my name is Robert Crossland and welcome to my video where we will be learning about FPTS. FPTS is a library that provides TypeScript to programmers with many popular and reliable abstractions that are typically used in functional programming. By practicing FPTS, you gain access to all sorts of fancy tools you can use to solve problems in your projects. Please note, just because you use FPTS in a project does not mean that you have to use it everywhere. Similar to Lodash, you can pick out the stuff you like and put everything else on ignore. In no way is functional programming enforced by opting into FPTS. A good question you might be asking yourself is this: why bother learning functional techniques at all when I can already program? I could start enumerating reasons like many other videos and bore you to death with a bunch of lingo and concepts you might not even be familiar with. Or I could give you one big reason and let everything else speak on its own merits as we learn it. The big reason is this: functional styles and techniques are being included by default into almost every programming language these days. Even if you don't want to use functional techniques for authoring your own code, the chances are high that you'll end up maintaining someone else's functional code at some point. Why not get ahead of the curve and give yourself some extra tools to make your life easier while you're at it? So let's not waste time with manners and get straight to the cake. We're going to skip the big academic list of properties that make a language functional and just show you one step at a time what functional programming is. When I was a kid, I played with Legos obsessively. You could build almost anything out of Legos, but that doesn't mean Legos could just be attached willy-nilly. There are rules that need to be followed. If you want to attach two blocks together, you must have an available and compatible attachment point available on both pieces. The pipe function works like this. You place functions inside of it, and the return value of one function will feed into the parameters of the next function. In other words, it must have an available and compatible attachment point, or it will all fall apart. If you are familiar with object-oriented programming, you have probably designed your code by classifying things into classes containing their state and behavior. With functional, you instead conceptualize by thinking about how to glue functions together into bigger functions, and then those functions into even bigger functions. The pipe function is the first functional glue we're going to learn about. Let's start with an example that can be made better by using pipe. In this example, we will take an array of charges someone has to pay, sum up the charges into a total, and add tax to it, and optionally a tip. On to the first example. This example isn't going to be very realistic, but the purpose is to learn how to use pipe, not to make a production application, so just play pretend with me for a moment. So what we're going to do for this application is we're going to sum up a list of charges. We're going to calculate the tax and add it to the charges, and lastly we're going to calculate the tip and add it to the charges and output a grand total. What we're going to need is a function to get the subtotal. We will call that function getSubtotal. GetSubtotal is going to take in a list of charges, which we'll pass in with a number array, and we are going to use the built-in reduce function to take those charges and add them all together into a final total, starting with 0. So the next function we'll need is a function to add tax. So we will take our current total, which is a number, and then we will return a new total with the taxes added on to it. Normally I wouldn't do it this way. Normally I would calculate the tax, return it, and add that at a later time. For this example though, the pipe function only takes functions that use one argument. They call it the arity of a function. So arity means number of arguments that a function takes. So in this case, we only want one. There's a way past this limitation. It's quite simple, but we're not going to do it at this time. And next, we're going to need a function to add the tip. We will do it the same way we did the tax. We will just take the total and return a new total. It's customary to give a 15% tip, so I'm going to hook up my server friends and just give it to them automatically. So now that we have all the pieces we need, we'll go ahead and combine them together into a getGrandTotal function that takes the charges and calls all of our functions we just made. So the first one we need is the subtotal, and we will call get subtotal with those charges. Then we need to get the new total with the tax. So we will call add tax using the subtotal number we just made. We'll pass it in here. So it returns from get subtotal a number, and then we take that number and we put it in this one and return a new total with tax. And then we'll do it one more time and get the final value by adding the tip. And we were going to pass with tax to it. So this value goes here. And then we have our final value, which we will console.log, and we will say the grand total is, and then we will put that in there. Let's test it out. So I will make an array of charges, make it purposely add up to 10, and then we will call grand total with those charges. We expect to see 12.42, and there it is. So writing it that way is all fine and dandy, but I think it could be made better by using pipe. So I am going to comment all this out so you can see it next to each other, and we are going to return the output of whatever pipe comes up with. So the first thing pipe takes is a value. It doesn't take a function on the first line. It can take a function that returns a value, but on the first line it expects a value. After that, you can only pass it functions that have an arity of 1 or 1 argument. And we'll go over how to do more later, but for now, we want to get the subtotal. We don't need to put any parentheses or anything like that because it takes the return value on the line before, passes it into the parameters automatically. It's typed. If you get the type wrong, it'll mess up. If I stick a string here, it'll turn it red. So, it'll then run that function, get that return value, and pass it down to the next. So we can just do it like this. You can also add anonymous functions. So here we're going to do the same thing we did before, and we're going to say the grand total is, we called it grand total. And if we did this right, we expect to see the same 12.42, and we do. So this is all fine and dandy, but it's pretty limiting to only be able to pass a single argument to a function, right? Well, that's where functional languages use something called currying. If you have, say, a function that adds 3 numbers and you pass it an x, it returns you a function that takes a y and a z. And if you pass the y, it returns a function that gives you a z. And when you pass the z, it does the x plus y plus z. Now, we don't so much have that in JavaScript, but what we do have is closures. And so you can have functions inside of functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to say tax mod, and it's going to be a number. And inside, it's going to return a function. We'll scoot all that in. And instead of this 1.08, we'll use the tax mod from outside the closure. Tax mod. And if I come down here, you can see it's now red. It's saying, hey, this needs, some love. So we'll pass 1.08 into the function so I can change it. And you can see now it's a function with an arity of 1. It only needs the total because we've passed the tax mod in already. We can do the same thing with the tip. We'll say tip mod number, and then we'll return an inner function. And that inner function, we'll use the closure to grab the tip mod, and we will go like that. And then here we need to put 1.15, and that should work. And now we should, let me make sure, get the same value. There we go, 12.42. It worked. So that was the first video. Hope you enjoyed it. I intend on doing one shortly to show you Option and how it can make your code better. Have a good one, everyone.